Okay, in this short film, I would like us to discuss or compare science to spirituality. And the main reason is due to the fact that science is now projecting itself to be the ultimate authority on truth. This is due to the fact that we've given science the authority to tell us about our own origins as well as existence. And so whoever you hand your power to concerning your identity, your origins, and your existence, you are giving that person the ability to play the role of God. Currently, we live in a world with pandemics, and the current pandemic being coronavirus or COVID-19. What most people don't know is that scientists usually create viruses from scratch in their labs in order to study their behaviors so that when a virus would spring occur, but I don't know if virus can occur naturally. But let's assume that the main reason is that when a virus would happen to exist, they would understand how they behave and thus be able to treat them. But what we don't understand here, or we also need to understand, is the fact that scientists can also create viruses and sell them to governments for manipulation, control, or population control. And so in this case, I would like us to examine science and as well as its flaws, because I'm interested in pointing out its flaws, beginning with the Big Bang. According to Einstein, he believed that he had a theory called the cosmological constant. And according to this cosmological constant, the universe had occurred on its own and was always there. This is a very flawed point of perspective from an adult, because nothing exists without a cause. We all know that we live in a world of cause and effect, meaning that if there was a Big Bang, an explosion which eventually gave birth to life, there must have been a cause for that action, because nothing exists on its own and nothing exists in a vacuum. And so according to spirituality, everything is consciousness, and this consciousness imagines itself into as many realities as possible, and it creates dimensions in these realities, so that simultaneously can play out with an infinite number of possibilities and imaginations. And these become our parallel universes. And this is the subject that science still cannot deal with. Furthermore, science, as we know it, of physical science, is still trying to understand only hydrogen. In other words, in a table of 100 different elements, science will still be struggling to deal with just one of them. In other words, if science was to write a complete essay concerning the periodical table, science wouldn't even master the hydrogen atom, let alone the fact that the Big Bang must have had a cause, and that the universe as we know it has a beginning and an end, and we perceive it according to our conscious state. And this conscious state is due to our DNA. And this DNA being an information carrier refers to the fact that for everything to exist, in other words, for me to be born, there had to be information prior to my birth concerning how I must be constructed. In other words, the shape of the eye, the nostrils, the nose, everything else. So what this explains is that information predates matter. In other words, matter is nothing more than a reflection of consciousness, which happens to be perceived by faulty minds, or matter is nothing more than consciousness vibrating at a low frequency, and thus giving us the illusion of solidity, or solidity as well as stable state. But this is not the case, because we all know that the only thing that exists is consciousness. That is according to spirituality though, because science insists on physics. And in this case, if we study the brain itself, you realize that the brain is governed by the mind, and the mind cannot be measured by any instruments. In other words, you cannot conduct an experiment on the mind, though you can do the same thing concerning the brain. And so what science fails to understand is that the most fundamental aspect or principle in reality, being consciousness, cannot be detected or measured, meaning that every scientific method or principle fails when it comes to consciousness, because consciousness is simply above science. And so with that being said, scientists are not interested in truth, but their careers as well as relevance. And so according to Einstein, as I was saying, his theory was eventually overridden by the Big Bang theory, which is also false, as I've explained, that we exist in a multidimensional universe, meaning that every second has infinite possibilities to be played out, and that these variations of instances in which let's say for instance in every given second you can take as many infinite possibilities of actions as possible, but you ultimately choose one form of action. So one would even ask what happens to the rest of the decisions which you do not actually make. In other words, if I'm sitting here recording this video, there's something else which I could be doing with this time. Instead, I decided to come here and record this video. And so in another dimension or universe, I'm not recording this video. Instead, I've been distracted and I'm doing something else which is different to what I'm doing currently. And so none of this is within the grasp of profession of science. And so science usually disqualifies everything it cannot truly or fully deal with as either fiction, or these are sometimes prolonged because there are no means to experiment with these possibilities or theories. And so there are many theories in science which are some as I've said placed there for the future, and some are experimented with, meaning those which they can actually conduct experiments on. But these experiments, as I was saying, depends on measurements, and consciousness cannot be measured. For instance, science also deals with dimensions. If I were to draw a dot has no real dimension, but a straight line would have 2 dimensions. A triangle would have 3 dimensions, but a sphere would have 2 dimensions. A triangle and a sphere would give us 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions. And so what this explains is that we live in a world where there are infinite dimensions, but the only difference is that we see reality according to the nature of our mind rather than according to how it is, meaning that it's our minds that have to evolve until we can fully understand reality, because we can only perceive reality as it is from the perspective of God, meaning the all-knowing mind, which is everything, or which permeates or creates everything as its own imaginations. The difference with science is like someone who observes a city from, that is the difference from science to spirituality. Is like someone who observes a city from a distance and seeing nothing but lights, compared to someone who understands the city, who's been there. And so to spiritual initiates, the advantage is that they are initiated to be in these worlds. In other words, they have current experiences of these dimensions, which are beyond the physical world. Whereas scientists can only operate within the physical world, and in this physical world they can only perceive reality according to the levels of their intelligence, which is not according to the level as to how reality actually is. And so science, as I'm trying to point here, is a very flawed study, which is governed by egos as well as a need for relevance rather than truth as it is. And so we'll continue this series on science and spirituality by pointing to as many flaws as possible as I've started. In the next series, we might as well look into the nature of cause and effect, as well as the nature of reality. In other words, as to how reality manifests itself. In other words, how consciousness manifests itself into reality, as well as the notion of free will and determination. So I thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy my videos. And if you do, I would propose that you invite as many friends as possible. You can like and subscribe and follow me, Tunzi Masog, on YouTube, so we can grow spiritually together. Thank you for your time. Peace.